So the rest of us, Isaiah chapter 7 is where we are going to be at today. I've referenced this passage in a lot of sermons over the years. I've never preached directly from it. We're doing one more Sunday of the names of God. Knowing the names of God. It's important to know the names of God because God is too big. He's too wonderful. He's too powerful, important. There's so much to his personality and makeup that to know him only by the name of God or only by the name of Lord, that we're missing out, because knowing him by the other names that he is called by and he calls himself by in the Bible, that empowers our lives. That strengthens our faith. That helps us when it comes to knowing him. It helps us in our time of need, knowing our God. So today, in fact, one of the other names of God we're looking at is Immanuel. And even as I was preparing it, I thought, well, this is totally territory where a pastor wants to take that and save that for Christmas season, but it's not just for that. As we talk about it here today, we're going to look at in Isaiah chapter 7 where that prophecy comes from. Right here in chapter 7. Let me give you the setup for what we're going to read, and then we're going to read it here. So the king of Judah at the time is King Ahaz. And the reason I say the king of Judah is because at this point in the history of the people of Israel, they have split into two countries. So you have, and Israel was 12 tribes, and the 12 tribes were divided in geographically, like we divide states. They had territories that were for each tribe, and basically the northern big chunk of Israel said, nah, we don't want you anymore. We're going to be our own country. And Judah is where the tribe of Judah was also geographically where the city of Jerusalem was, the temple, worshiping God, and the temple was there. Judah and it was kind of the smallest tribe. Benjamin was another one, and in the moment on the fly, I'm forgetting there's a third one. But basically, you add those three together compared to the other ones, and they were much smaller population-wise and geographically. So, but that's important to know when you read some of these stories here, that they have had they're all Jewish, they're all the same people, but they've kind of split into two countries. And with that, you keep a king over Judah, and that's so when you read in the Old Testament and you get a certain point where you're reading king of Judah or king of Israel, this is the differentiation so you understand when you're reading the Bible. So there'd be a king over Judah, and it'd be those three tribes, and then a king over Israel. He'd be king over the northern tribes there. And sometimes they got along, and sometimes they didn't. And usually when they didn't, it was because usually someone wasn't serving the Lord, one of their kings or not there. And that's kind of what's going on here. King Ahaz, king of Judah, he's a terrible king, a godless man. And you look in the Old Testament, God used difficulty. He used hardship. He used pain to try and draw people back to him. Because when they walked away from him, he withheld his blessing. He withheld his protection so that they might turn back to him and know that with him is blessing, with him is abundance, with him is favor. And King Ahaz, talk about a thick-headed guy. He didn't do that. Things have been so bad even at one point, Israel, the northern tribes, they attacked him. They killed 120,000 fighting men of Judah in one day. That's mind-boggling. Mind-boggling to think. We had that tragedy in Afghanistan as we're doing that withdrawal a few months ago, and 13 soldiers taken out in one day, let alone almost 100 people total there. And that's mind-boggling to us. Can you imagine 120,000 men killed in one day? And if that wasn't agonizing enough, the northern tribes then, they took 200,000 women and children of those people of Judah. They took them captive as slaves and took them up to their part of the country. And they were going to be their slaves. And who knows what else they would be. Now, God intervened and worked on some people's hearts. And they said, we've already crossed the line by taking out so many of our own people. Even though we're two countries, we really are one people. We've already crossed. If we take these women and children as our captives of our slaves, we are crossing a major line here, and they sent them back. But this goes to show you how weak King Ahaz had made his nation and his people. And So as we read here, there's another situation that's brewing, and there's three kings, the king of Israel and then two other countries, who have banded together, and they're coming after Judah. They're going to attack it. And their plan is, and you'll read it here, but I'm just going to say it so you understand what's being read there. Their plan is, we're going to conquer Judah, we're going to kill King Ahaz, and we're going to put in place this guy, and he'll be our king. He'll be the king that works for us. And that term then that was used would be a vassal king. When one nation would conquer another nation, they would still need somebody in charge to run it. You didn't have internet, you didn't have phones, you didn't have close communication, but you would put somebody in charge of that nation who, even though they might have the title of king, they answered to the nation that had put them in place. It's called a vassal king. When you're reading the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the people of Israel are under control of Rome, and you read about King Herod, getting ready going into Christmas here in short order, and you'll read a lot of stories about King Herod. King Herod, he was Jewish, but he, for all intents and purposes, was a vassal king of Rome. He answered to Caesar on all that he did. So, that's the setup for it here. Isaiah chapter 7. Oh, we're going to go forward here. Get past the last song. There we go. Oh, almost. We'll get through these songs yet. There we go. Isaiah chapter 7, verse 5 says, Aram, Ephraim, and Ramallah's son, these are the three countries coming against him, have plotted your ruin, saying, let's invade Judah. Let us tear it apart and divide it among ourselves and make the son of Tabeel king over it. Yet this is what the sovereign Lord says. So Isaiah the prophet has come to King Ahaz. And he says, this is what the sovereign Lord says. It will not take place. It will not happen. For the head of Aram is Damascus, and the head of Damascus is only Rezin. Within 65 years, Ephraim will be too shattered to be a people. The head of Ephraim is Samaria, and the head of Samaria is only Ramallah's son. If you do not stand firm in your faith, you will not stand at all. Now God just, in this prophecy through Isaiah, the short order of it is that he just went through each three of those nations, and he just said how each one really, they're not as big, they're not as powerful compared to God as one might think. So he's saying now to King Ahaz, if you don't stand firm in your faith, you will not stand at all. That's true for all of us. That's true for all of us. Then he goes on to say this. Again, the Lord spoke to Ahaz. Ask the Lord your God for a sign, whether in the deepest depths or in the highest heights. But Ahaz says, I will not ask. I will not put the Lord to the test. Then Isaiah said, hear now, you house of David. Is it not enough for you to try the patience of humans? Will you not try the patience of my God also? Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and will call him Immanuel. So this is, and by the way, and I know most of you know this, let me just repeat it here. The name Immanuel means God with us. And just to emphasize that, at least in our American grammar and speech, when we say with, you're going to watch football today, some of you, and you're rooting for your team. You are with them. Well, obviously, you're not on the field, but you're with them in heart. You're rooting for them. You're on their side. That's one way we mean with. I'm on your side. I'm rooting for you. I'm with you on that. I agree with you. Like that. Or with means present. Means I'm here with you. And that's the word with in this case. God with us. Not only on our side, but present with us. This is an amazing, powerful prophecy that's being given here. So I've given you a little bit of the background of what's going on here. Let me give you just another snippet here to give you an idea of King Ahaz and how bad he was. He's king, but he felt that, serving God, I don't know if this always works. So I'm willing to try lots of things. So when we say he was godless, we mean that he was giving up on God. But it doesn't mean that he stopped being religious. He was a very religious guy. You see all throughout his reign, he's always up for doing religious things. The problem was that most of his religious things didn't have anything to do with God or were in opposition to how God had instructed his people to worship him. So here's one thing in his life. At some point, Ahaz thought, you know what? I need to offer a sacrifice to the other god, and I know what kind of sacrifice is really going to get me in good favor with that other god. I'm going to offer some of my children. And so he offered some of his very own children as human sacrifices to this other god. Just horrific stuff. And we'll name one or two other things later, but in this story here, here's some things about this that are important for us to learn. One of them is just this, is that disobedience creates confusion. When we've disobeyed, there's been lots of times in life where we've disobeyed and we knew full well we disobeyed. And in fact, we may have even had seasons of life where we were living in disobedience, not just having a moment of disobedience, but we've had a season of disobedience. And we know even in that season, I'm not living how I'm supposed to be living. I'm not honoring God the way I need to honor God with my life. And but one of the things then, one of the side effects that comes along with it, and many times we think this, oh man, I got to get back to God. I just got to stop doing these things and start doing these things. And if I just change all those things, then it's going to be better. But here's one of the side effects that creeps into our thinking in the midst of disobedience, is that in the midst of living in disobedience, we get confused about God. We get confused about his personality. We get confused about his nature. We get confused about his heart. Just an example, I remember years ago, this is when we lived back down in the Chicago area, and we spent a family day at Six Flags, having a great time, and Cole, 7, 8 years old, Alyssa, 2 years younger, about that, 5 years old, and he's doing what big brothers are just wired to do. He's irritating her. I don't even remember what he was doing or saying. He's just irritating her. And it'd been going on a while, for an hour or two, and there'd been lots of stop it and don't do that, and and the like. And finally, he just crossed the line with me. I was like, and I did that's it. If you don't, then whatever. And I don't even remember what I said. But and I gave a general promise threat, and he knew, probably Dad's gonna go through with that. There's a backstory before this though. This is somewhere in the summer. And the local library, just like they do here, they do a summer reading program. If you read so many books, then you get this prize and this award. And Susan and I had added an incentive to it. We'd said, hey, Cole, and there's a sheet that you fill in, each time you read a book, you color in something and you get them all colored in. And we said, Cole, and it was a lot of books. Cole, if you fill the sheet, he had a certain toy that was the it toy in his mind at that time. We'll buy you that toy. Okay, so now go back to Six Flags, the amusement park, him just being a brother who's irritating his younger sister, and I just finally, that's it, don't do that anymore, like that. And he got the message, because then he went into pout mode, as kids would do, not any different than the other kid. And then about a minute or two later, he goes, well, now I'm probably never going to get, and he names the toy. And which communicated two things to me. Okay, he got it, I meant stop it. But the other thing it showed is that in his disobedience, he got confused and he got foggy on the character and the nature of his parents. And I stopped him right there and I said to him, Cole, I want you to know something. That's still on the table. We're not taking that opportunity away from you. In fact, I want you to win that prize with us. Keep reading the books. Just because you were doing this here today doesn't mean that me, your dad, or your mom want to take away that prize that we want to bless you with, that goal that we want to see you accomplish. See, in his disobedience, he got foggy on who mom and dad were. Like, oh, they're so mad at me now, they want to do even more to me. I've been so bad. I've been such a disappointment. They want to do even more. This is what happens to us, even our relation with God. In our disobedience, we start getting foggy on who he is. We start getting foggy on who he is and misunderstanding that. So that happens to us, and that makes repentance And that makes coming back to him even more difficult. Because as we come back, we're coming back on a crooked path. We're coming back with misunderstandings and what we need to do to get right with him. All these things that Ahaz did were just terrible, awful things. One of the things he did, as an example, was he knew that militarily and politically he was weak. So he made an alliance and got an ally with Assyria, another nation, who they were stronger. And if he could make an alliance and partner with them, then if anybody was going to threaten his nation, they knew that they would have to go up against Assyria as well. This is the exact same reason that America has had 100,000 soldiers on the border of South Korea and North Korea for decades now. Because it sends a message to North Korea ever since the end of the Korean War. If you launch an attack here on the border between your country and South Korea, you're going to have to attack America to do it. And so if you attack South Korea, you're attacking America. Do you really want to take that on? Exact same principles at work here with them. So King Ahaz makes a visit up there. Makes a visit up to Assyria, and while he's there, he's at one of their temples, and he sees an altar there. He's like, wow, I really like that altar. I love the look of that and how they do it. I think we should have it. So he had somebody draw it up and real nice, and he sent the plans home. He said, hey, build this altar and all that. We're going to put that in the temple. We're going to start worshiping like God with that altar there. But God had made every single thing in the temple of a specific design and instruction by him. It wasn't just about the look. It was about what pleased him. So not only that, so King Ahaz returns home. There's the new altar, and the priests have put that where the main altar is the altar that God had designated and designed. He had it shoved over by the wall, and he said, we'll keep using that one. And he said, here's the deal. From now on, when just ordinary Joe comes to offer a sacrifice, they offer sacrifice on the old altar, the original altar. But when I come to offer sacrifices, and there's big things that we got to come to God about, I'm the one who gets to use this altar. But they also gave it the position, the physical place in the temple of priority. What's that communicate to people? Communicates that your sacrifice is not the same as my sacrifice. You aren't as important coming to God as I am coming to God. But we all know all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. We're all missing out on this here. He's in his disobedience, he's confused that, some of us are more important to God than others. Some of us matter more to God than others. Some of us God listens to more than other people, like me, the king, who comes up with fancy new altars for the king there. He's confused in all that, and along with that, it reaches a point eventually where he just reaches a point like, we're just going to shut down the temple and just not even use it anymore. And then he set up altars basically on every street corner in the entire city of Jerusalem. Or if anyone wanted to offer a sacrifice, they could just go to any street corner in the whole city and offer a sacrifice there. And do that. And now he didn't need to go to the temple. What was he doing with all these things and his fogginess? He was making worship of God. It sounds absurd when you listen to it. But what was the thinking behind it at the time? Convenience. Hey, we're all religious here. We're all spiritual. Let's make worship of God more convenient. Let's make it so it's not just a hassle. Sometimes there's such lines and it's so packed and it's so difficult to get to the temple. Here's the thing that I was thinking about that as far as that principle relates in our society in the last 2 years. When COVID hit and the shutdown comes, all the churches go online and you can watch church online. And there's a whole segment of Christians who never stopped watching online and never came back. But here's the misunderstanding in all that. We didn't go online, whether it be us or any other church, we didn't go online with our services to make it convenient. We went online so that people could have some access. It's not about convenience. It's about access. And so if you just remain with church just online, and you're just doing it out of convenience, well, here's the thing about it, and I know I've told this story before, but it fits in so well here, is that worshiping out of convenience really loses its impact of being worship at all. The story I've told before, but fits so well here, is the husband who, pulling out of work on a Friday afternoon, pulls out his parking spot, goes to the exit of the parking lot, and right at the exit of his parking lot, there on the sidewalk is a flower salesman. He goes, oh, and he, bright idea as a husband, rolls down his window, pulls some money out, hands the money, gets some flowers, takes them away. Hey, honey, bought you some flowers. Oh, you bought me flowers. Oh, I love you. You know, just he hit a home run. Next Friday, he's pulling out of work. There's the flower salesman. He pulls up in his car, rolls down his window, hands him money, gets the flowers, and back. And then, oh, you did it again, you know, like that. And us men, we train easy. He's like, I got to keep doing this. And so he did. And after a number of weeks, he can't help but say, hey, listen, I got to tell you, all these weeks, I pull out of my parking spot. I don't even have to get out of the car. I just rolled out the window, babe. Just hand some money. It's so wonderful. Don't you love the flowers? And she's like, oh, okay, thanks. And he keeps up his routine. And then from then on, every time he hands her the flowers, she's like, thanks. Till finally one Friday, she goes, keep the stinking flowers. I don't want them. And he's like, what the what? He goes, I thought you loved this. She goes, you don't do any effort. You don't even get out of the car. The most difficult thing you do is you hit the button for the window to roll down, and you have to lean sideways to pull your wallet out. Because she said, there's no effort to this expression that you're doing. You're only buying me flowers because it's convenient. She said, I don't want your stinking flowers. Because all they are is convenient to you. If it weren't convenient, you wouldn't do it for me. See, in Ahaz's disobedience and his fogginess about God, he thought, well, God just wants to be worshipped. Doesn't matter where. You know what? At some point, some things about where can you pray anywhere? Yes. And on with all our religious expressions. But if we only ever do what's convenient, then the expression isn't worth very much. And Isaiah lost sight of that. In fact, I got so excited to talk about this, I missed the verse that gives the example. Because I will not ask. You know, they'd said to him, ask for a sign. He said, I'm not going to ask. I'm not going to test the Lord. Well, part of his fogginess was he knew some of the Word of God, but he didn't know God. He knew from previous points in Israel's history and scripture that had already been written even up to that point, you shall not put the Lord your God to test. And he thought, his mind and the encyclopedia of God in his mind said, well, that would be testing God. I'm a good religious person. I don't want to test God, as if he hadn't already been testing God's patience. But this show, he's thinking, oh, you know what? I know the right answer here. I'm being tested. And so the right answer here is don't test God. Nope, not going to do it. There, did I pass the test? But he was foggy. He was confused in his understanding about God. Now, here's another thing, is that the truth of the matter is whether it be Ahaz or us, we've been commanded to ask. We've been commanded to ask by God things. Many things with this. You look in verse 11, it says, ask the Lord your God for a sign, whether in the deepest depths or in the highest heights. And King Ahaz misunderstood the difference between testing God and trusting God. It's mind-boggling to think that the God of the universe would ever say to you or I, ask whatever you want. That God would show up with his checkbook, sign the line with his signature, and then lay it down in front of you and say, go ahead, fill it in. God's given him a blank check. It's mind-boggling to think that God would do that. But here he is, he's telling him, go ahead, fill it in. Whatever you want here. One time, as soon as I were newly married, no kids yet, we were down visiting her family, and we're staying at her grandmother's house, and her and I had gone out for the day. Her uncle and his daughters, Susan's cousins, who are many years, grade school age compared to her who's married now at the time. We come back and we go in the room at Grandma's house we've been staying in. We could tell one of those girls would be in there. And I see my checkbook laying out. And with crayon, one of them had tried to write a check there. And But we also knew the kid, and it wasn't just for play. She wanted to write a check. But when it says, look at the words of the Lord when he says this now. Here it says, ask the Lord your God for a sign, whether in the deepest depths or the highest heights. Now those are locations, but it's really communicating a thing that's being said here. How big can you think? God, this is reinforcing the statement I used a moment ago that God just said, here's a blank check. But God is saying here, as big as you can think, as wild as you can go, ask it. Which is amazing also to think, but here's Ahaz living so incredibly disobedient to God, and yet God shows up. Don't get me wrong here. This doesn't mean that God's okay with our disobedience. Because God, as is typical with him, had a bigger picture in mind with this. But the highest heights, the deepest depths, they probably didn't know what they were at the time. We do now. The highest heights, Mount Everest, 25,000 feet high. The deepest depths, the Mariana Trench. It's over 11,000 meters deep. I think it's 6.9 miles. If you think Mount Everest is high, here's how deep the Mariana Trench is. If you take Mount Everest and you put it in the Mariana Trench, there's still going to be 1.7 miles of ocean above Mount Everest before you get to the surface. That's how deep the Mariana Trench is. God's saying, go as extreme as you can think and ask me for a sign, for anything. Here, just what an incredible thing. But God has commanded us to ask. He's saying there's no place out of his reach. Also, you can ask as wild as you think, but he's also saying there's no place out of my reach that I can't answer, that I can't come through for you. The sign was to offer reassurance and confirmation to Ahaz that God is real, that he's powerful, and he's going to act on his behalf. And for the people of Judah, King Ahaz had his back up against the wall because of these enemies coming against him. In a very real way with these armies and the things that he was worried about. And I told you before, he had 120,000 men killed in one day, 200,000 women and children taken captive for a period of time and sent away. King Ahaz had no realistic reason to believe that he had any hope of getting out of his situation. And then God shows up. God shows up, and when King Ahaz has no way out, he offers the king a confirmation sign that he is the way out in all this. He tells Ahaz, hey, go big. Go big on what you can ask of me and what you can expect from me, which right there communicates that if God is telling you to ask for a big sign, then the sign itself is going to be really, really big. When God says these words here, the highest heights or the deepest depths, God's saying, the answer I'm going to give you is going to be mind-boggling. The answer I'm going to give you is going to be bigger and higher and wider and further beyond what you could have thought of ever before. That's the hint there. See, but you look in the Bible, God has a history. He has a history of people telling people to ask. He showed up to King Solomon and he told him this. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon during the night in a dream, and God said, ask for whatever you want me to give you. Here's that blank check again. Solomon, you know the story. He could have asked for victory over his enemies. He could have asked for incredible wealth. And he could have asked for long life. He didn't ask for any of those. He said, Lord, and he was brand new king at this time. Lord, this job's too big for me. And I think I'll screw it up if I don't have wisdom. Give me wisdom. God said, wow, that's amazing. I'm so pleased with that request. He gave him the most incredible wisdom ever. And then he said, because you didn't ask for these other things, I'm going to give them to you anyways. But God told him to ask. And Solomon did. He did ask. You see later in the Psalms, actually it would have been earlier because this is written by Solomon's father, David. He says, one thing I ask from the Lord, this only do I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze on the beauty of the Lord and to seek him in his temple. See, here's what I think I'm asking. I want to be with God forever. It's not just him. Jesus says in Matthew 7:7, ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be open for you. In John 14:14, Jesus said, you may ask me for anything in my name and I will do it. It's scriptures like this that were explicitly on my mind a half hour ago as we were praying for the sick. Lord, you said to ask. So I'm doing what your word says here. As we ask for you to heal Lori's heart or heal Dorothy's back. You said ask for anything. You told us to ask. Now, Paul learned this, and he says it in Ephesians 3:20. Now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us. You know, I'm the Star Wars generation. I grew up with those movies, and sometimes when I hear this verse, I think of a moment in the first original Star Wars movie where Luke Skywalker is trying to convince Han Solo to help them save the princess, and he's reluctant to do it, and finally Luke appeals to his shallower side and says, there'll be a reward in it. And he says, how much of a reward? And Luke says to him, more than you can imagine. And Han looks back and says, I don't know, I can imagine a lot. But here's Paul saying he does immeasurably more than all we could ask or imagine. So what you're asking, God doesn't just go one notch beyond it. He goes immeasurably more beyond it. Here, one more. James 4:2 says, you do not have because you do not ask God. We've been told to ask of him in all these things. When God tells you to ask, you ask. When God tells you to ask big, ask big. Even I myself, as I was working on this week, I thought, I got some areas I am asking too small in. I've got to up my game on what I'm asking. In fact, I thought, this is kind of silly. I have God as my Lord and Savior, and he's commanded me to ask. Why am I asking so small in these areas? He's God. Look at what he's done all throughout his scripture and telling people to ask. Why am I asking so small? Well, here's one more thing in this story here, is that in the midst of all these things, God has a goal. He's got a goal in all of this. Now here's that confrontation back in verse 13 and 14. Then Isaiah says, he's talking to Ahaz, hear now, you house of David. That's speaking to Ahaz, because that'd be the family line. It'd be like if he were to say to Dietz, he'd say, listen now, Mr. Dietz. That'd be the equivalent of that there. Is it not enough to try the patience of humans? Will you also try the patience of my God? Asking. In other words, by not asking, you're irritating God. You're trying his patience. It says, therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. All right, you're not going to ask. This tells you God's like, you know what? All right, you're not going to ask. I'm going to give it anyways because this is so big. This is so much. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and will call him Immanuel. This is probably about 700 years before Jesus is born. For 700 years, as Jews read this scripture, how many times did they think, what is that? What does that mean? What is that? How could that happen? We all know that our goals and God's goals, we know they're not always the same. They're rarely the same. We also know that we don't always think of this part of it, but God's goals are not only different from our goals, but even if we have the same goals, sometimes his are just so much bigger in the outcome of what they could be. King Ahaz had some goals at this time too. He had 3 enemies who were coming up against him. It wasn't a matter of if, but when, and they were coming. And he's a king. He knew he didn't stand a chance, and I'm sure he had been, listen, we're reading the Bible here, and we think it's all about prayer and prophets and things like that. He's a king, which is also a political position. I'm sure Ahaz, at this point, had sat through countless meetings with his generals, strategy sessions, meeting with advisors, having heads of state or secretaries of state, what we call them here, or ambassadors from other countries and the like, and sending our ambassadors to other countries. I'm sure, politically speaking, administratively speaking, he had been working hard on this situation. Making the calls, sending letters, reaching out to this person and that person, talking with his generals, strategizing, planning. Well, what if we try and lure them over here? Would we have an advantage if we did this? What if we just offered them that instead? And they said, all right, we won't come. In all this here. But he was not a godly man by any stretch of the imagination. And what I mean by that is that in the midst of trying to work his problem and having all his meetings and strategy sessions and conferences and like that, One of the things he was never having was a conversation with God. God, how can you help with this? How can you make a difference? He didn't really believe that God could have a solution, let alone be the solution in all this. And at one point, King Ahaz has kingship. I told you he lost to the enemy army. So his response, I haven't told this one yet in him, but his response when he lost to the enemy army was this. And I got to show you the scriptures in 2 Chronicles 28. It says this: he offered sacrifices to the gods of Damascus who defeated him. For he thought, since the gods of the kings of Aram have helped them, I'll sacrifice to them so they will help me. But they were his downfall and the downfall of all Israel. They must be better than Jehovah God, so I'll pray to them since they were strong enough to whoop up on me. Just so twisted in his thinking there. But God's goal in all of this was Immanuel. Ahaz was hoping for a political solution. He was hoping for a military solution. He was hoping for some kind of intervention. Maybe they could make a treaty, and there would be like, all right, maybe we have a tax that we pay to them every year, and so we get out of it like that. You see that many times in the scriptures. Like, all right, we're going to beat you. Here's the deal: you get taxed. You're going to have to wring it out of your people somewhere or another, but you're going to pay us millions of dollars a year, or we're going to come back and make it even worse on you. Maybe we just offer them up a tax that we give to them all the time. He's thinking all these things, and yet God had even more in mind: Immanuel, God with us. You think of God so distant. You think of him so far away. But I want to be with you. That's my heart. That's my end goal. That's my game. When you read the book of Revelation and you get towards the end, and it paints this picture of the new Jerusalem coming down from heaven, and it's beautiful and it's amazing, and as it descends from heaven down to earth here, one of the lines that gets spoken of by God, it says, now the dwelling of God is with men, meaning mankind. God's heart is, I want to be with you. That's my heart. So Jesus himself, when it says here, remember the story started, ask for a sign. He said, Jesus is the sign. He is Immanuel. He's the sign of what? Of what God says in Revelation, that his goal, his heart, his desire is that there be a time when he is with us. And he's bringing that about to fruition. He's bringing that about to fulfillment. That's his great desire. I want to be with you. And I don't want anything to be in the way of us. What an incredible day that's going to be. What an incredible time that'll be. Such a time that he says, that, this is my desire, that when I'm with you, I'm going to wipe away every tear. He himself. I mean, many of us in this room have lost how many times to a child we've wiped away a tear. When we've done that. What a thought to think that our Heavenly Father wants to be the one to do that with us. What incredible love, what incredible compassion. But he's saying, listen, this is my goal. Your goal is getting out of this problem. But he said, my goal for you is me. I'm the goal I have for you. That I could be with you. However it would be, not however it would be, he has an exact plan how it wants to be, but his desire is that he be with us. While we're seeking solutions in this way and that way, he's saying, let me be your solution in all things. Let's bow our heads. Father,